Nightmare in Newcastle, the savage 1963 Halloween night murder of Katherine Lillian Armstrong. Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. World Cold Case Thursdays. I'm your host, Jay Nickel of Nickel Investigations. Brutal 1963 Halloween night murder of Katherine Armstrong was especially disturbing, given that no suspect or motive for the crime was ever discovered. Background: Katherine Lillian Armstrong, known by her middle name Lillian, was born on April 3, 1893, in Pembroke, Wales. She grew up in a typical middle-class family with her parents, Tom Armstrong and Sarah Ann Robson. Lillian's early years were spent moving around various parts of Wales and England. By the time Lillian turned 18, the family had settled in Devonport, Devon, where she began training as a student teacher. The Armstrong family later moved to Newcastle upon Tyne, where Lillian's life and career truly took off. Career: Katherine dedicated herself to education and eventually rose to the position of headmistress at Denton Road Junior School. She never married, and after her parents passed away, she continued living alone in the family home at Goldspink Lane in Sandyford, district near the heart of Newcastle. Armstrong had worked for years as a headmistress of Denton Road Junior School. By all accounts, she was a dedicated and caring educator who believed deeply in the value of education. Her role as headmistress earned her respect from colleagues and generations of students and their families. Those who knew Katherine remembered her as a disciplined, no-nonsense woman with a soft spot for her students. After her retirement, Katherine didn't just fade into the background. She continued to live a rich, full life, marked by her deep involvement in the Central Methodist Church on Northumberland Road, where she was an active member for over 40 years. One of her passions was the church choir, where she had sung faithfully for decades. The church was a place where she not only worshiped, but she also built strong social connections. Independence was another defining feature of Katherine's character. She was 70 years old at the time of her murder and lived alone in a large house called Doncaster House. It's the kind of home that might seem too big for a single woman her age to maintain, but Katherine managed to do it by herself. She enjoyed her solitude and was known to be private but approachable when engaging with others. Up next, Halloween 1963. Halloween 1963. In the 1960s, Halloween in England was not celebrated as it is today. Dead children often asked for a penny for the guy, making effigies of Guy Fawkes to burn on bonfires. Children from the Sandyford neighborhood were out trick-or-treating and enjoying the holiday, while Katherine Lillian Armstrong kept to her usual quiet routine. She was last seen around 6:30 p.m. when some local children knocked on her door. Armstrong handed out treats but didn't engage much. By 7 p.m., she was expected at choir practice at Central Methodist Church, something she had attended religiously for over 40 years. That night, Katherine never showed up. For someone like Katherine, whose life was governed by routine, this was alarming. Fellow choir members grew concerned, but figured she might have fallen ill or had something urgent to attend to. Yet no one could have imagined the horror folding inside her home on Goldspink Lane that night. Discovery. Following morning, November 1st, Katherine's cousin, Ada Ridley, went to visit Lillian for their usual Friday meetup. Upon arriving at Doncaster House around 10:50 a.m., Ada immediately felt something was wrong. She noticed that Katherine's curtains were still drawn. This was unusual, as Katherine was known for waking up early and following her daily habits meticulously. Ada went to the door, but despite knocking several times, there was no answer. Growing more concerned, Ada called the police. Police sergeants soon arrived and forced entry into the house. Inside, they discovered a horrific scene. Katherine's lifeless body lay at the bottom of the staircase. She'd been stabbed 28 times around her face and head, and a nylon stocking was tightly wrapped around her neck. The defense wounds on her hand suggested she had tried desperately to fend off her attacker. Blood spattered the walls, indicating the killer had searched the rooms after the murder, perhaps looking for valuables, although nothing appeared to have been stolen. Up next, the investigation. The investigation. The local police immediately launched a full-scale investigation within hours of Katherine's body being discovered. Police vacation time was temporarily halted as all available manpower was put towards cracking the case. The local crime squad, led by experienced detectives, began combing the area for clues. The police went door to door interviewing and questioning hundreds of neighbors and locals. Their efforts yielded no leads. They quickly realized that this would be a very challenging case to solve. The brutality of the attack suggested an emotional, possibly personal motive. Scotland Yard, with its reputation for solving complex crimes, was called in to assist the investigation. Detective Superintendent Eric Jock Reed of the Scotland Yard Murder Squad, known for his tenacity, took charge of the case. His team quickly began interviewing people in the community, trying to retrace Katherine's last hours. There were more questions than answers. Katherine being seen alive just hours before her death, there was no clear evidence pointing to who could have committed such a savage act. As forensic technology in 1963 was extremely limited compared to today, detectives had to rely heavily on witness statements and physical evidence found at the scene. Dusted for fingerprints, but none provided a clear lead. The murder weapon, a knife that had been used to stab Katherine repeatedly, was nowhere to be found. This further complicated the investigation. No trace of the killer seemed to be left behind. One of the main challenges investigators faced was a lack of forced entry into Katherine's home. There were no obvious signs of a break-in, which suggested that she likely knew her killer or had willingly let them in. This led detectives to focus primarily on her acquaintances, neighbors, and anyone who might have been close to her. However, Katherine was known to be a private woman. Her social circle was small. There were no immediate suspects. Despite the brutal attack, police found no evidence of robbery. Nothing was missing from the house, ruling out robbery as a motive. Additionally, there were no signs of sexual assault. Investigators were left to deal with a heinous murder with no clear motive. On the evening of November 1st, 1963, a man called Newcastle Ambulance Control, claiming to be the Sandyford murder. Gave no details and hung up before dispatchers could ask any questions. While police worked to trace the call, the man's identity was never discovered, adding another layer of mystery to the case. As the investigation pressed on, officers believed the murder weapon was a long-bladed instrument, likely a knife, but no such weapon was ever recovered. By November 3rd, the press began speculating that the killer was still hiding in the city. It was thought that the murderer may have entered Lillian's house through the front door and left through the back. Two young men had been seen climbing on a nearby roof shortly before the murder. After questioning by police, they were ruled out of the inquiry. There was also speculation Katherine's murder might have been linked to another unsolved crime in the Newcastle area. In 1962, just a year before Katherine's death, another elderly woman was murdered in a similarly brutal fashion. Similarities in the case led some to believe the serial killer might have been at work, preying on vulnerable older women. However, no concrete connection between the two crimes was ever established. This theory eventually lost traction as the years went by. Katherine's case grew colder as the weeks passed, despite a massive effort from law enforcement, with more than 16,000 people interviewed during the investigation. Police questioned anyone who be in the area around Goldspink Lane that night, hoping someone had seen something or knew anything that could lead them to the killer, but no solid leads materialized. The community was gripped by fear and unease, knowing that the person responsible for this horrific murder is still out there. Up next, the aftermath. Aftermath. In the years that followed Lillian's murder, her house remained empty for a time before various tenants moved in and out. In 1973, a woman named Mrs. Joan Black moved into the house and reported that previous tenants had left abruptly, believing the house was haunted. They claimed it was sensed presence, even claiming to see a figure out of the corner of their eye near the bottom of the stairs, the very spot where Lillian had been found. Mrs. Black didn't believe in ghosts, but the house's eerie reputation persisted. In recent years, Sandyford had become a popular area for student housing due to its proximity to Newcastle University. The hope for answers in Katherine Armstrong's murder, not entirely faded. Old cases are often revisited, and with advances in forensic science, there's always a possibility that one day new evidence could come to light. But for now, Katherine Lillian Armstrong's murder remains a haunting mystery, a story that reflects through the horrid history of Newcastle, unresolved and unfinished. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into this macabre story. If you enjoyed this episode of Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast, make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts.